Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session. It's really good to have you. Taylor and I are excited to be here. We've been looking forward to this for a while. The title of our presentation is It's Time to Reclaim Our Socials, and You Can Too. And what that is we're just going to sort of be going through how Reclaim has recently approached our social media presence. So before we get started, just to introduce ourselves a little bit, I'm Pilot, and I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but it's my turn right now. Taylor and I work for Reclaim Hosting, which is a web hosting company that primarily works with higher ed institutions. So we came out of a project at the University of Mary Washington, and a lot of our focus is on providing higher ed institutions with access to open source platforms that they can own and control as a way of offering digital agency. Taylor, do you want to talk about yourself a little bit, or?
Real quick, because we got a content-packed session. So
Yes.
I'm Taylor. I also work at Reclaim. And before I worked at Reclaim, I mostly worked in higher ed as an instructional technologist. Really excited to be here at this conference. It's a great opportunity, and hope you all enjoy our session.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Reclaim has a pretty long history with higher ed institutions and open source hosting. We started at the University of Mary Washington, and now we work with quite a lot of higher ed institutions to provide hosting for various projects made using open source applications and tools like WordPress is, the most famous and the most well-known, but there's a lot of different options. And we're going to talk about some alternatives as part of this presentation. But part of this means that our values are really rooted in offering digital agency and control and ownership over what your web presence looks like. And as the internet has evolved recently, particularly with Twitter's recent history, we've been becoming more and more conscious of how and where we interact and present ourselves online. Yeah.
Um, to kind of talk about what we're doing now, we'll kind of this presentation is a little bit sequential, a little bit of a story. Again, kind of how our journey started with this stuff. It really is. I mean, the context for it was kind of watching what happened with Twitter over the last few years. And it's really on some level, it's about exactly what that space has become, but even the fact that spaces like that can be owned and sold and sorry, bought and sold, is part of that context for us as well. Um, and really got us thinking as a company about sort of what we're investing our time into, as employees, as sort of and as a company and a group of people. And so we wanted to explore what more we could do, what we could change, and how we could kind of gain control back, and sort of what made sense, keeping in mind that, again, we're a group of people and an organization and a company and not just an individual. So the way we approach that stuff is a little bit different, of course. We have always been comfortable in using open tools and open spaces, of as a hosting company. Like, we're web hosting, that this is what we do. And so we wanted to kind of start with exploring what other alternatives we could look at and what would be the sort of the most effective ways. And on top of that, I think a big important part of this for us was to try to demonstrate one way that we think other folks could use. So everything we're doing here, we're thinking of ourselves as like, hey, let's go out and be explorers and try these things, and let folks know if the water's fine, that kind of stuff, that kind of approach. Um, to kind of lay the groundwork here and to map things out so it's clear, we're gonna use visitor resident mapping. You may already be familiar with it. It's as the visitors and residents as a framework's been around for a long time. David White created a very big part in creating that framework and the mapping that goes around it. I've got a link here to David White's website. You can check it out if you're curious. But there's a lot of information out there about it. We're going to use a very small part of it, which is the mapping part, to kind of lay out our spaces as they kind of existed in, let's say, 2022 for Reclaim hosting. Visitor resident mapping is a relatively simple tool where you can plot spaces on a map. Usually you go personal and professional on one axis, and the other axis you say spaces that are visitor or resident, which are spaces that you engage with and leave something about yourself or evidence of yourself, or those are resident spaces, where visitor spaces are places you don't leave as much of a social trace. If you're curious and want to do this later on, you can click the other, or
I'll put it
which
in the
you can use
chat.
this other link. Thanks. Which will use a fantastic free to use tool called Excalidraw, where you can actually do this. In the interest of time, I'm going to start with a pre-filled map and then we'll return to it later. So this was our map as it existed in 2022 for Reclaim hosting. And there were really only a couple meaningful spaces that we were using. We were using, of course, our own website, reclaimhosting.com. There's some stuff posted there, some announcements, but not frequently. We're reusing it for that. And then there's, of course, our main landing space on the web. So you can go there, find out what we are as a company, sign up for our services. Very resident. Everything we do as a company is visible there. And I kept the access personal and professional for our purposes here today. But I kind of think when we're talking about a company, it's all technically professional, right? So I think of this as more like fun and businessy. So professional would be businessy, and personal would be a little bit more fun stuff that's maybe not directly related to like us making money as a company, but more related to what we're interested in as employees at the company. Um, some other spaces here, we use Twitter. We use that in both ways. We used it to highlight cool things happening out in on the web that we like to see, and we also use it to talk about things that are happening at Reclaim. Uh, we used email, of course, to communicate with customers. That's very visitor. It doesn't really leave much of a social trace. It was very, buttoned up business-like. And we use YouTube, which we mostly did for fun purposes, a series called Reclaim Today. Um, the thing about most of these spaces that we realized is we really don't have much ownership over any of them. Certainly not YouTube, certainly not Twitter. Email, I guess, that's a complicated one. And our website, we of course own. We're a hosting company, and we use WordPress for our website. So it's built on open tools. We host it ourselves. Great. But we weren't doing a lot of spaces in outside of the very professional area that were spaces we controlled. So that's kind of where things existed at that time.
Yeah. So we sort of took a look at that and went, don't love it. Not really. We can do better. And we started experimenting with some new social media tools and some new social media platforms. One of the things that we wanted to look at is, well, where are we talking to people? What are we talking to people about? In addition to the hosting platforms that we provide, we also do a lot with Edtech courses and tools like that. We wanted to start our Discord, reclaimed.tech/Discord, to create a sort of community space. We don't own Discord, so we ended up having to look at this and some other tools and basically say, what is the trade-off here? What is worth it to us? And that was a way of making sort of more informed and active decisions about, okay, we're going to go here because we like the way that it curates community spaces, and we like that it is already fairly well established. We looked at Mastodon. So Mastodon is self-hostable. That was a big plus for us because it meant that we could host our own instance and we could run it ourselves and use it as a way to connect with people. we use the platform, the tool Ghost, which is a blogging and newsletter open source software that is self-hostable. So we use that for we started with the monthly newsletter, which is the roundup, and then we also moved on to having it be for the blog .reclaimhosting.com. We use that for breaking news and announcements, to highlight major projects that we're working on, lots of things like that. Our workshop and course resources, I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of those. That uses a combination of PeerTube and Owncast. Owncast is a streaming application or tool, and PeerTube is a video hosting tool. So sessions will premiere live through Owncast, and then they will be archived on our PeerTube, which acts as a YouTube alternative. And then finally, we use Buffer for cross-posting. Buffer is also not a tool that we own, but it is a tool that essentially lets you synchronize multiple different types of social media accounts and platforms into one so that you can cross-post. So if you want to be posting on your Mastodon account and your Blue Sky account and your Twitter account, and maybe also Facebook, you can go into Buffer and do it all from there. And that was really important because as we started looking at lots of different spaces, we started going, oh, too much to do one at a time. How can we make this easier on ourselves? Yeah. So Taylor, can you, I think you're next, and you're going to show off basically where all of that lives.
Yeah, we're going to take what Pilot just said and map it real quick here. So, so a couple things. So we'll start with I think Mastodon and also Blue Sky and Buffer, which we use to host to all of those tools. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to group them in with Twitter, and that's because we use them pretty similarly. And I'm going to expand this a little bit just for the sake of legibility. And like I said, we use them all pretty similarly, so I'm going to leave them in the same box. And I'm also going to put Buffer here, which is not its own social network, but it's a tool we use to post to all three of these. Basically, for us to be in those spaces and posting to them separately would be a huge time investment that we're probably not really we're probably not really interested in making. The other thing I'm going to group together here is YouTube with both our
Owncast.
Reclaim.tv efforts, which is Owncast and PeerTube. And I've already ruined my information hierarchy here because I'm using these parentheses in different ways, but that's fine. So that all lives at Reclaim.tv, and we post the same video stuff to both Reclaim.tv and YouTube. And that there's a technical setup there that we could talk about, but really don't have time to right now. But I will say, if you're interested in getting into self-hostable video, that's a significant technical thing to do. But we've been doing it now for about a year, and actually a year and a half, just about. And there's tremendous value to us because we can, of course, not be completely dependent on YouTube, but it also means that we have a lot more agency over like copyright type things. There's a whole thing we could talk about with copyright and licensing on YouTube, and we have a lot more control over that on platforms that we own. The other thing I'll mention here, and these are the big ones for us, is the blog, which is at blog.reclaimhosting.com, and Roundup, which is a monthly newsletter. And these really are for us massively important. And they take up, in fact, I'm going to move these to be over a little bit. This is where the mapping falls down, is when you get into spatial stuff. But these are, I would say, very important for us personally and professionally. So we use them for both the purposes of for fun, sharing things as a company, but we also use them for for announcements and that type of stuff. And it's very resonant for us. So that's been the biggest addition for us. And then the Discord, which is kind of difficult to map, to be honest with you. But I would argue Discord because it is messaging and very much like place and time, right? People don't tend to revisit Discord messages that happened weeks and months ago. I'm going to put that for our purposes more in the visitor area, slightly leaning more personal, because it's more about a community space that we use. And to be clear, you can use these mapping tools and go like, we also have a community forum, which I haven't mapped. We also like there's all kinds of things that you could include here. But these have been, I think, the largest changes for us and the places we're putting the most energy into right now. So we've got all these tools, but what's the point? What's the philosophy of this? And what we've landed on, exploring tools over a period of time, is we're trying to use a diversity of social platforms to drive folks to what the spaces we actually own and control. And for us, that's the blog, that's the newsletter, and to maybe a slightly less extent, Reclaim TV. So we're using all these social platforms, ones we control, ones we don't, in different capacities. But we're really trying to put that time and energy into putting more into our actual blog, the blog.reclaimhosting.com, and our monthly newsletter. Those are spaces we own and control. They're email newsletters, so they're easy for folks to get if they're interested, either via email or RSS. If you're in the RSS and you're using that, and so that's been kind of our guiding star is how can we put the time in here and use these other things to funnel people there. Um, some other things that I want to mention here. If you haven't noticed already, our slides, there's a link at the bottom of every page of these slides. That's our slides if you want to look at any of this stuff later. But some more things we're doing that related to this stuff. Our reclaimed.tech website, we do flex courses that are sort of like deep dives on a particular topic, and there's a lot of them relevant to what we're talking about today. So we've done one on Ghost, which is the tool we're using for both our blog and newsletter, and it has really good email newsletter support built into it. So we have a whole flex course on that if you're curious about Ghost. We've done one on open publishing ecosystems, which is a little bit more tangentially related to the social stuff we're talking about today, but I think very relevant to Open Ed as a conference. And this is a flex course we did on open source publishing tools that you might not have heard of that are all self-hostable. So we did this on Manifold, and we covered Doxify This and struggling hacks. So we covered those tools. And then finally, another one, open media ecosystems, where we talk about all kinds of self-hostable video and audio tools that you may want to know about. PeerTube was one of the ones that and Owncast were covered in that particular flex course. Finally, we have a community page, which you may also want to check out. And this is just a great place to keep up with all the things we are doing at Reclaim Hosting. It has links to all of our videos and blog stuff right there. Yeah, all right. Sorry.
Yeah. That's just about wrapping up, and we've got about 5 minutes for questions, but I will just say, as we are wrapping up, to connect with us. That's the point of this, session, and we would love to hear from you guys. So like I said, like Taylor said, we have the Discord. We also have a very recent Blue Sky account that we're excited to be on there as well. So come be our friend so that we feel welcome.
I'm going to interrupt and mention you can map a domain name to Blue Sky. Don't know if you knew that. We didn't know until recently. So that's cool.
Our Mastodon account, and then of course the blog and the newsletter. The newsletter, the roundup, goes out on the last weekday of every month, and the blog comes out once a week or so, depending on whether we have anything like really breaking news examples. Yeah, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. It looks like Tina, you've already shared one, which is, can you share other examples of educational organizations making their own .tv hosting site? And the answer is, I'm not 100% sure that we can.
Well, yeah,
Well, go
not
ahead.
in this exact way that we have. I'm not aware.
Yes,
There may be, but I just don't know of one off the top of my head. But that's a really good question. And there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. So plenty of educational organizations publish to YouTube, of course, right? YouTube is online video in lots of ways. But I would keep in mind that there's all kinds of other tools that are similar in idea, right? So you do see plenty of schools using like Panopto, and there's like a million alternatives to Panopto. And that is kind of a way of right, like that's content that doesn't live on YouTube. um, I don't know if it's owning the content in the same way. That's probably a question for someone who's more familiar with those platforms than I am. And I think the main reason you don't see folks self-hosting things like PeerTube, like we are, is A, those tools have only been around for a couple of years in any meaningful way, and B, it's somewhat complicated. So we're at a host at a hosting company, we're very interested in trying these tools out so that when folks come to us and say, "Can you host this?" we can say, "Yeah, we have experience with it." And I think there are a lot of folks. I think we're on the precipice of seeing more people do this, basically, is what I'll say, without spending another 30 minutes talking about it. Um, if you have other questions, please put them in the chat. Yeah, Cultura is another one. Another question we have, how do you deal with or recommend dealing with ASRB or similar institutional compliance review arms at institutions? Um, Yeah, so I don't know, Pilot, if you want to talk about that from our perspective as a hosting company. Otherwise, I have some things we can mention.
sure.
But
Yeah. So with regards to what we're doing here specifically with Reclaim.tv and things like that, the ASRB and other institutional compliance doesn't map as neatly onto that. But for the work that we do with higher ed institutions to host their projects, um, in general, we work with our clients, with our partners to say, you all know what compliance standards are most relevant to you. We are happy to help, and we're happy to work with you, but we don't request any more data that is absolutely necessary on our end to make things run. We don't want to collect user data or anything like that. So uh, I'm not familiar with ASRB standards specifically. Um, I would say that the okay, that's just you guys' version. Yeah, I would say that we work with our partners to make sure that what we're offering is in compliance with what they need. If there is a larger outside standard like FERPA or anything that they need to match on, we do our best to do minimal data collection on our end, and offer them the tools that they need to be compliant on their end.
yeah. Another question, Alan, is a great question. How do you decide not to be, which is probably harder than deciding where to be in some ways. Um, I think for us, always a calculation of time versus impact. And I say calculation, but there's no actual calculation. It's based on vibes. We are a team of 10. And I would say Pilot, myself, Meredith, and Maren, who does some work with us, do probably the most of this type of social and community building work at the company, but it is none of our primary responsibilities. Maybe me like the most, but it is a shared load, and we all have all kinds of other things we do all week. So that's a big part of it, is saying, can we be here in a way that will be meaningful without it being, a ton of extra time? And that's where tools like Buffer come in for us, where we can cross post things. That's where the whole strategy of, let's try to do all of our work on publishing on these high impact places like our blog, and let folks know about it, basically. That's where tools like PeerTube come in, and YouTube, where we can basically make one type of video and put it in both places, and it's not too much work. It's not double the work, right? Most of the work is making the video content, and then we just have to upload it to both places effectively. And we even have some automations around that we work through. Um, but yeah, thanks everyone
Thank you.
for tuning in.
Sarah noted in the chat we're out of time, so we're wrapping up, but we're happy to stay behind to answer any questions that you guys might have. Thank you all for coming. This was awesome. And